Hello there, my very good friends. On today's wrestling news, I'm going to tell you what Vince McMahon really thinks about Keith Lee and Riddle.
A title contender is out of TLC 2020.
We've got news on the time Elias found himself on WWE's fired list.
And All Elite Wrestling have got some big plans for Christmas this year. I'm Adam Wilborn.
And I'm Andy Murray.
And this is the news.
Let's kick things off with some backstage goss courtesy of Dave Meltzer of Wrestling Observer Radio. A few comments here collated from various points on a recent episode talking about Vince McMahon's true feelings on Riddle and Keith Lee. I still can't get used to that, man.
Nope.
You get used to these four-name cut-offs, but Riddle, it's just not clicking with me. Anyway, let's talk about this. What does Vince think of Riddle himself? He describes the original bro as very funny in his own weird way. He is a weird guy, I'll give him that, but he likely doesn't view the former UFC fighter as a main eventer at the moment. And the same goes, unfortunately, for Keith Lee. However, the situation is a little bit different there. He believes that the former NXT champion isn't ready for a headlining spot on Raw just yet. But the reason he's being sent for this additional training that we've heard all about at the Performance Center is to kind of prepare him for a bigger spotlight in the future. These, moves back down to the PC aren't seen internally, at least, as a demotion, which is kind of nuts considering the guy debuted flirting with the WWE title picture, and now he's dropping handicap matches on Raw. So it's like, that's kind of a demotion by definition, lads. Either way, it's always interesting to kind of pick apart what Vince McMahon thinks of certain wrestlers, and you can infer what he thinks about certain wrestlers knowing what we do about him from his past 40 years or whatever as a pro wrestling promoter. With regards to Matt Riddle, for reasons unrelated to his TV performances, I couldn't care less about him being in a headlining spot at the moment. But Keith Lee, I think the descriptions of him here are kind of ridiculous. The situation with him going back to the PC, we have a question about that, so I won't go into detail on it. Again, it's kind of ridiculous. Mm-hmm. He's a multi-talented performer who I think could probably fill that headlining spot. But you do have to build people up, so, let's see where it goes.
Do you know what I realised just today? What Vince McMahon is like with these sort of new stars that they're bringing up from NXT or just signing or whatever. Do you remember when Mr. Burns signs all those pro baseball players to the baseball team and then says that one, like, I told you to get rid of those sideburns, and he's got no hair on the sides of his head. That is what it is. He has no idea what he's got on his hands. Both Riddle and Keith Lee deserve and hopefully will be world champion within the next year. Probably, I think it's fair to say, like, with the Riddle thing, I understand, like, what you said there, Andy. There are issues outside of the ring that may hamper that. But Keith Lee, man, honestly, look at what he achieved in NXT. Like, all they need to do is hand him a highlight package, Vince, and just go, look, all right, maybe don't put him in the title picture yet, but WrestleMania next year, as has been sort of teased, he needs to be in and around that title, and all you need to do is keep him warm until then. And yet what's actually happened is, like you said, he's been jobbed out in a handicap match because they have to wait 10 to 15 years to push someone into a main event picture. I don't get it. As you say, we're going to get into more detail with the whole Riddle thing. With the whole Keith Lee thing a little bit later on, but he just hasn't got a bloody clue, has he?
Yeah, no, the handling of him has been extremely weird from start to finish, from what we've seen from him so far. Hopefully, better things lie in wait in 2021.
Right, let's move on and talk about TLC 2020. It's going down on this Sunday, of course, and Lana is no longer in the title picture. Which, I 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been this annoyed about finding it out, but it's not like I was like, oh no, I was really looking forward to that match. But they've spent months, Andy, building her up, supposedly, make her into this baby face by putting her through a table about 9 weeks in a row or whatever. And now she's just been taken out. And so it's Asuka and a random new partner who's probably going to be either Dana Brooke or Mandy Rose against Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax for the tag team titles, not even in a tables match. What's going on? Lana got taken out last night, basically. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler murdered her after she pinned Nia Jax. The only highlight of this was Miro, aka Rusev, saying, I taught her that move. lewd on social media, that Miro. I also like the WWE description of Lana's injuries. They did the whole, Shayna Baszler stamps on the arm and twists the leg off, and Nia Jax does some sort of submission that she doesn't release. The company described Lana's injuries as devastating injuries to her elbow and leg. And it's for the second story, and probably for many more occasions. Andy Murray, what's going on?
Yeah, so just to kind of illustrate how ridiculous this whole thing is, at TLC 2020, WWE were going to have a women's tag team title match between the champions, who are a thrown together tag team, and another thrown together tag team in Asuka and Lana here.
And I just want to point out, Andy, former tag team champions, the Iconics, have been split up and put into two separate tag teams.
Yeah, so you have those two thrown together tag teams elsewhere, but you had these two thrown together tag teams for TLC 2020. One of those thrown together tag teams has now been split apart, and now they're going to be put into another thrown together tag team with a member of Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke, which is another thrown together tag team with no history whatsoever. The whole thing from start to finish has been a calamity. The table stuff was funny, right? It was a good laugh for 9 weeks or whatever. The idea that this was going to create Lana as this major babyface was always stupid from day one. This whole deal is a mess. I am so glad I have a 2-week holiday coming up where I don't have to watch Raw for a little while, because Jesus Christ, this show. Okay, that opening segment, top 5 worst of the year. Let's move on to the next story. Speaking of worst of the year, let's talk about Jackson Riker adjacent content. Elias, right? Elias was a recent guest. He's not worst of the year. I like Elias.
Yeah.
He was a recent guest on Chasing Glory, which is Lillian Garcia's podcast, speaking about a number of things, including the time he was in NXT and ended up on WWE's fired list, which may come as something of a surprise given how prominent he is on Raw these days, but that wasn't always the case. Quote here from Elias. One thing I became very aware of when I got to NXT was that the people who said no to me at my tryout were now there and in charge, and their minds hadn't changed. I was put on the fired list numerous times in NXT for whatever reason. I remember being pulled aside by the head of NXT at the time, and he said, "Hey, listen, you got to come up with something for us. We're going to examine you in about 30 days, and hey, maybe you'd be better off somewhere else. Maybe not everybody is meant to be a WWE superstar." So this would have come towards the end of his time as basically a jobber in NXT before he came up with the Drifter persona. He came up with the Drifter persona, he had his run in NXT, and now he's on the main roster, and he's probably been more successful on the main roster, I would argue, than he has in NXT. He recently signed a long-term contract with WWE, so it's safe to say that Elias is no longer on the fired list. I think the guy's kind of perfect for WWE, right? He's a sports entertainment act, he's improved a fair bit over the years. He's not going to be Bret Hart in the ring, but there's only one Bret Hart in history, so that was a really stupid point I've just made. But what I'm trying to say is that Elias is a complimentary mid-card presence, and I'm glad he didn't lose his job.
Yeah, exactly. I think he's someone who works perfectly with a crowd. Like when crowds return and everyone's in such a good mood to see wrestling again, having him come out and go, "Your local basketball team's a bit crap, isn't it?" He's always guaranteed to get a reaction. I think, like you say, I think he works far better actually on the main roster, which is a rarity nowadays. And I'm very much glad he's still there, as much as I'm not a huge fan of seeing Jackson Riker now by his side. But Jackson Riker's been given a second chance by the company. Let's just see what he does with it, I suppose. Let's transition over to All Elite Wrestling, who have got some big plans for Christmas this year. They are going to recreate a number of scenes from A Christmas Story, starring members of the AEW roster. Now, of course, there's always a yearly 24-hour marathon of A Christmas Story on TNT and TBS. And AEW, are paying homage to that, like I said, by putting clips out there of them recreating some of their favourite bits. It's either going to go on YouTube or down on TNT.tv as well. First clip we've seen stars MJF as Ralphie, Chris Jericho, Santa Claus, of course, and Frankie Kazarian as an elf. The good thing about all this, not only does it make all of AEW stars look like buffoons, which is kind of quite funny and what we probably need this time of year. But all the funds that they raise is going to go to one of AEW's non-profit partners, Culture City, who work towards helping people with sensory issues, including invisible disabilities like PTSD, dementia, and autism. Now, of course, AEW was working with Culture City for quite some time to make their shows sensory inclusive since last year. You can donate, but not until the 23rd, so hopefully around that time we will share links and stuff for that. But yeah, just something nice this time of year, Andy.
Yeah, man, just a bit of festive fun, and it's all for a good cause. So, hey, who could possibly hate on that? I mean, someone will, because it's 2020, and that's what people do. But, you know, it's a good cause. The first video they uploaded was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Hey, lighten up.
MJF killing a game, as always, as Ralphie. Right, let's move on to your Twitter questions. At WhatCulture WWE, of course, we want to get in touch with us. First question today comes from J-Man, who says, greetings, legends. Greetings to you, J-Man. Concerning 2020, would you say the wrestling business has had a good year or a bad year? Obviously, considering the ongoing global bastard, it's been very bad. But it's also been great because of the quantity and variety of content we now have. I thought I knew the answer to this halfway through this question, Andy, but like he says, it's not all bad news this year.
It's a balanced situation. WWE objectively have had a very good year when you look at their financial reports and the record-breaking profits they're going to make. Creatively, I said this to you before we came on the call, since I started covering professional wrestling professionally in 2016, I can't remember a time when Raw was as just guff as it is at the moment. So creatively, I would argue that WWE at best has had, you know, a poor year. They've certainly had highlights here and there, some really strong matches. The Bayley and Sasha feud was excellent. Lots of positive stuff to point towards, but for the most part, I think it's been a pretty diminished year for them. AEW, I think, has had a pretty decent year, all things considered, although, you know, I look at the AEW product at the moment and go, okay, so if all of what we've seen this year from AEW had played out in a building full of fans, it would have been better, right? Everything by default would have been better, pretty much. So on the whole, I don't think it's been an entirely positive year for the wrestling business. This is a really good question, actually, because we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
There have certainly been plenty of positives. I think that companies have done well to make the most of the diminished situation, but it is a diminished situation. And when you look at the slide that New Japan, for example, like creatively, that company has gone from the best book promotion in the world to kind of a mess. That contributes to it as well. Overall, I would say a negative year for pro wrestling. But the caveat is there's a bastard kicking about, and they've done well to cope. So, you know, in that regard, you could call it a good year.
If you were going to grade it, you'd probably give it like a C-, I think.
Yeah,
is the best way of putting it. And hopefully, for fans, this has made us truly appreciate what we have.
Yeah.
Just next year. Like, I know it's still a way off and I don't want to get carried away, but, you know, you think by like summer next year, like the desire to go and watch live wrestling, if they put, you know, John and Steve from down the road on at the Academy in Newcastle in the summer when we're all back to go. Me and Andy are going and we're screaming from the top of our lungs for John and for Steve. Because it's made I think it's made a lot of people realise what we just sort of all took it for granted. Creatively, like you say, mixed bag. And bad in terms of, you know, wrestlers being kind of forced to work or, you know, fired or whatever. So hopefully, fingers crossed, 2021 is going to be a lot better. Please, God. Right, second question today comes from the loudest sports show on Twitter, who says, true legends all round, wondering your thoughts as to why the likes of Otis and Keith Lee got prescribed extra training, while Nia Jax is still looking as green as grass on weekly TV while she injures her peers. Now, we should say the Lana injury, I sense, is kayfabe, Andy.
Yeah, you're right. The short, cynical answer to this is that Keith Lee and Otis aren't related to The Rock. But yes, no, you're absolutely right in your assessment of Nia Jax. She's somebody who was not in that developmental system for long enough and has shown no real improvement since she hit the main roster either. It's quite astonishing. The Otis Keith Lee thing, you can argue that Otis maybe isn't quite there as a worker for where WWE wants him to be, but you know, if Otis's ceiling is like mid-card novelty guy who everyone loves and he's like kind of funny, he's kind of fine, right? He's pretty good. He's solid. You know, he doesn't need to be Bret Hart. Keith Lee is a guy I've been watching for about 6 years, and at not one point in that 6 years have I looked at that dude and gone, you know what this guy really needs to get better at? wrestling.
There's
I think
literally
it's
video packages of him on Squared Circle right now, just being limitless. So
in like 2014 or something, on some Texas indie with like 20 people there. Keith Lee was great back then, and he's great now. I don't understand it at all. The short, simple answer is that Vince McMahon is out of touch. Because if you can't see what you have in Keith Lee, who is literally limitless physically in the ring, you maybe need to get some new glasses or something, Vince, because this is complete and utter garbage.
Absolutely. Like we said at the top of today's show, you kind of covered everything there, Andy. They do not realise the talent they have on their hands. They have, like, Keith Lee versus Angel Garza on sodding main event while those comedy segments going on Raw. And, you know...
Brother.
Oh, anyway, let's move on. Final question today comes from CM Chonk, who says, easy to point out all booking from WWE, but who is a superstar not named Roman Reigns who's been booked perfectly?
This one took a while to think of because we go over the questions before we come on the call when they're good questions, good solid questions that require a bit of thought. The one I came up with is AJ Styles. I think he's had a very, very good year. He hasn't won any matches that I've thought, oh, he should have lost that. But similarly, he hasn't lost any matches where I've sat there and gone, oh no, he should have won that. Like, he's been established as just this dickhead in the upper mid-card who doesn't necessarily always need to be in the title picture, but when he does come into the title picture, he's very credible, as he is just now with Drew. That match is going to be really, really good this weekend. The Boneyard match was awesome. I love that stuff. Had one of the best WWE matches of the year against Daniel Bryan on SmackDown at the start of the bastard. I think he's just had a very solid, consistent, and undervalued year. The guy's an all-time great pro wrestler. He continues to be booked very well, and I have no complaints over his portrayal whatsoever.
I was thinking maybe Sami Zayn. I mean, accidentally for large parts of this year, but that ladder match he had was spectacular, and his new T-shirt is, well, amazing and on everyone's Christmas list, if we're honest. So maybe him. If not that, the best we could come up with outside of that was Big George and Mace, who's 1-0 in singles competition now. We're struggling when it comes to WWE stuff. We can talk about other people, AEW, New Japan, etc. But in terms of WWE, yeah, you're struggling. Let's move on to today's and finally, and a weird feud that is developing before Christmas. Kurt Angle versus Santa. Saint Nick versus Saint Olympic. Go and check it out on Kurt Angle's Twitter, at @RealKurtAngle. Unprotected sack shot to the head, Andy. I don't know where this has come from, but Kurt Angle is apparently jealous of Santa, and Santa isn't happy that Kurt Angle's stolen his milk. Feud of the year?
Well, Michael Sidgwick versus MJF exists, so let's not go that far, but it's right up there, man. Great stuff.
Great to see Kurt Angle just having a bit of fun on social media, to be perfectly honest. Go and give him a follow, at RealKurtAngle, as I said. But let us know your thoughts on all today's news stories in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. For daily wrestling podcasts, myself and the Daily Boys sitting down to review Raw. Oh, good. Later on today. Plus, you can let us know your thoughts and Twitter questions on Twitter, at WhatCultureWWE. Watch there. Follow both of us. You can follow Andy Murray at
Andy H. Murray. The H stands for Happy Birthday, Eric Young, who is thriving in the moment.
Oh, yeah.
At the moment in Impact Wrestling. Good for him.
Happy birthday, EY. Follow me on Twitter, at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCultureWWE. But for now, my thanks, Danny Murray. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.